once again, we have the general partner from Landmark Ventures, Scott Zackheim, who's here joining us again. But this time, everyone, we're going to be talking about the new wave of digital media as we all just ramp up on the type of content that we're consuming. And I mean, Scott is over digital and media for Landmark Ventures specifically. So I guess, Scott, we'll just kick it off with that. What are some of the trends that you've been seeing ever since things have kind of gone on lockdown in the digital media space?
Yeah, the environment right now is fascinating. There has been a really just an abnormal supply and demand relationship going on where your major brands are pulling advertising dollars. And so despite the fact that you have your most highly active, engaged consumer base at home with all their screens on TV, computer, cell phones, advertisers have tightened the belt and are waiting for some normalcy. So you're seeing CPMs that are actually plummeting, although audiences are going up, which has created a vacuum, and it's being filled by smart emerging brands who might be sitting on cash, who may have raised venture money recently, who can be aggressive. And so they're the ones that are getting their name out there right now, both on TV and on digital channels. They're saying, hey, we have some cash, we have some runway. The cost for advertising, the potential return on advertising spend we can get for this moment is huge because we have all these customers, all these consumers at home engaged, and the advertising super cheap. I don't know how long that moment in time will last. I think that you're already starting to see a shift, and I think ad prices will start ticking back up, especially as we get closer to summer. I think as we get closer to July 4th holiday, that's going to be a big inflection point. And I think as sports come back on TV, hopefully in mid-June, you'll see a return to an uptick on advertising dollars and probably return to some of your bigger, more prominent ad spenders, bigger brands who will be back in play. But the smart advertisers out there, the emerging brands who want to get their name out there on a national level are really taking advantage of this moment.
Right. So they found a way to kind of carve out an additional market share, which perhaps they would have been either paying more money, right, to get in front of these sort of.
Yeah, I mean, they would. I can't imagine some emerging brands who are advertising in certain channels they are right now at the level they're spending. They wouldn't be able to afford it under normal circumstances. They're just taking advantage of a very cheap marketplace.
Right. And people are still tuning in because they don't have anything else to do. But when you think about the interplay, right, beyond just traditional media, even that's broadcast or digital media, but really where social media comes into play. In the advertising space, you think of things like influencers and sort of the balance that they kind of were striking at a time. But now social media influencers, to your point, brands don't have the budgeting dollars, the advertising dollars to get behind that. Do they?
Great question.
Are they?
I think if there are dollars to play around with tradition with some of your bigger advertisers, they are still really carving out influencer strategy for right now. I think that in speaking to some partners that have play in the influencer space, that oversee influencer networks, that work with brands to engage audiences via influencer, it is a really good time to use those folks. And so and I can't speak to the market cost of it because I don't have that level of detail, but in kind of speaking to folks in and around influencer, I know that brands are shifting strategy and trying to allocate more dollars against influencer because it's a really easy, low-hanging fruit way to engage audiences right now and do it. And I think the key piece ultimately, because all of it is fragmented advertising channels, no matter the way you chop it up, if it's TV, if it's, desktop or, display or phone or social, paid, organic, influencer, ultimately these are all just different ways to get to the consumer. But what's interesting for influencers specifically, and why I think brands are going in that direction at this moment, is because it creates a level of authenticity, a level of trust. You can speak through certain people that have a great trust amongst audiences, and so looking for any way to get in front of customers and create that trust at this moment is huge. And so I think that's why more brands are leaning on influencers at this point.
Scott, can we go back to something that you mentioned, the fragmentation within media, right? Which existed long before we got into our current pandemic situation. Is this fragmentation that you see across this sector, is that something that is likely to continue?
Apologies for blacking out there for a second. Yeah, I think that the proliferation of channels is immense, and it won't change. I mean, as long as there are new younger audiences tapping into new channels and they continue to grow, I think that fragmentation will continue. In conversations over the last couple of years, I spoke to marketers who told me, hey, maybe we finally leveled out. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever new channels came about that, Gen Yers, millennials, and whomever were pushing, maybe it's finally calmed down. Lo and behold, I speak to both publishers and brands who have new folks that are tagged to engage via TikTok, right? What was TikTok 12 to 18 months ago? And that's being driven by high schoolers for the most part. So as there are new consumers, new age groups that brands have to engage with, there will be new channels. And I don't see a stop to the fragmentation, maybe a little bit of consolidation. Facebook, Twitter, whomever gobbles up another tech company and puts it under their banner. But it's wild, and it's a huge onus on brands to have to engage consumers via so many channels, and it's a headache, and you don't have the resources to do it, and it only continues to grow. So I don't envy folks who are running digital organizations for brands that have to figure out a way to engage every last customer in every last channel that they're in.
Yeah, getting to all of those touch points to try and meet people where they're at, it can be very strenuous and just stressful on the organization in general. Let's move a little bit more towards, I would say, day-to-day, what has turned into more day-to-day business platforms like Zoom and Slack. I mean, I come out of the...
How long it takes for a human to take on a new habit or learning and stick to it. But I think that from a statistically significant or scientifically significant amount of time, I think that 8, 12, 16 weeks will be enough time for humans to learn new behavior. And so being able to interact with family, with distant cousins, with old friends on Zoom isn't going to go away. To Zoom's credit, and I mean, it's almost like a Google type story. That brand is clearly winning, and I think they're doing it on brand, on name. I mean, Zoom's a noun and a verb and an adjective all wrapped in one, and good for them. They happen to be an event partner of ours at Landmark, so we're big fans of Zoom, and we use them internally. But unbelievably, and there are other players in that space, but they've risen above, and I think a lot of it has to do with the name and how quickly it caught on, and to their product's credit, ease of use, and how quickly the consumer has been able to adapt to use it. So pretty amazing story, and they're certainly not going anywhere after this.
No, well, as my cousin said, she was like, no, I'm only getting the free version that cuts you off after 30 minutes. She was like, that's enough time with the family. I can just say Zoom cut us off. That's all we had time for.
That's pretty good.
Really quite funny. Do you think that the kind of larger media players on the outside of this situation have what it takes, one, to bring the audiences back to them, which we can get into in another show, some networks that have definitely been struggling, but is there a way for them to say, hey, we know ratings haven't necessarily been as great, the content specifically, right, hasn't been that great because they haven't been able to create something new in a long time?
Yeah, with some of the major networks and movie studios, it is a struggle. And if we're talking about fall here, when new shows are supposed to hit, I mean, Hollywood's been shut down for weeks. Unclear about production for the fall slate of shows. I think that any Hulu who might have had shows in production or post-production that are in the pipe, and they can continue to release them, they'll have a ton of success. But for folks who are putting out sitcoms and live studio audience shows, and they've all been on pause, I really don't know, what that terrain looks like come fall. I will say this for the major media networks, they're going to lean on sports heavily. When sports goes live again, That's the way that they'll bring audiences back on to your NBCs, your ABCs, your Foxes. You'll see a lot of primetime sports as soon as that's allowed again. Even if there aren't fans in the stadiums, it will be a ratings bonanza. And I think that way they'll be able to keep audiences on their networks, and then at a certain point use sports to market their non-sports content slate, which I imagine they'll have to figure out and start producing at some point in the pretty near future if they want fall shows. So really interesting.
Well, when you mentioned the movie houses, it made me think, like, I can't remember the last time I saw a commercial on TV for, like, some movie that was supposed to be coming out, since all the big studios have their releases to basically some unknown date. 12, 18 months out. I'm like, gosh, what type of commercials are even on TV other than like fast food restaurants?
Well, and they're also pushing straight to on demand. And so I know I have little ones at home. They're clamoring to watch Trolls, which was a big release in the last 2 weeks and was supposed to go to theaters, but they sent it straight to on demand. And so you'll see more of that until theaters open back up again.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, thanks so much once again for joining us, and this time bringing us some enlightenment around this sort of new wave of media and what we can expect right now, and also looking ahead. And so next time, Scott, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.